It's easier to interpret emotions as a simple condition rather than a complex consciousness, especially when a mind is stuck in survival mode. Other minds might be able to imagine emotions as a form of consciousness, but the representation is often fictional, playful, and metaphorical in nature.
Are you saying that the conversation we're having right now is more complicated than being a playful metaphor?
Without completely breaking the fourth wall, I think so.
Welcome to My Personified Mind, where concepts are personified and molded into impressive main characters. My name is RJB, and today I have the pleasure of introducing a very near and dear friend of mine, Fear.
Hey RJ, thanks for having me.
Absolutely, Fear. It's not very often that a mind gets a chance to interview its emotions. You've been friends for about 23 years now, right?
I think 23 years is being a little charitable. To be honest, I think it would be more appropriate if you were to consider me your guide.
Touché. I admit that I didn't realize how big of an impact you had on my life until about 23 years ago. Suffice it to say, only in the past 5 years have I been truly trying to open a clear line of dialogue with you. Is that more reasonable?
Yes, RJ, and I commend you for the work you're putting in. I also appreciate that you finally want to have a conversation after all these years.
Of course, Fear. I hope this interview provides you with enough traction to guide me through the rest of your impressive journey. How about we start by introducing me to the world you grew up in?
That's kind of complicated, but it is ironic that you used the word hope. Both Hope and I were given our English names about 1,000 years ago. We've been around a lot longer than that, but it might be easier to reference how we were defined.
Okay, I love the imagery of you and Hope being basically twins. Tell me more about how your little feet started leaving huge footprints.
Well, if I use the metric of how I was defined to trace back how I grew up, old English definitions would have said that I'm a danger, a peril, a risk, or a trial. I personally like being defined as a trial because trials are like tests. Like a test of will to overcome a dangerous task, or a test of endurance to outlast a perilous endeavor. Tests generally encourage the mind to think critically, and I am, unapologetically, a contrarian.
That's another fun concept to wrap my mind around because it explains why I'm always questioning everything. The concept of you being a trial invokes many memories where I might have misinterpreted you as one of those trials.
Exactly. I was there trying to guide you to more constructive conclusions, but you often didn't listen and you thought you needed to fight, fly, or freeze. The defense mechanisms I built in your mind were supposed to be a reference to investigate everything you were afraid of, not a wall to intellectually hide from everything you didn't understand.
That's very true because I really had no idea why I needed to be afraid of anything, just that I was afraid.
And it was exhausting trying to help while you were either passed out or paralyzed by your overly developed defenses. I didn't know how to get you to listen without you wanting to listen, so I just yelled a lot, hoping you would hear me. I think all you were hearing was the yelling.
Is it unsettling that you sound like so many of my past relationships?
That's the tragedy, isn't it? When I was around, before I was defined, I was guiding so many minds to progress and greater understanding. Whenever those minds were tested by the chaotic conditions of their surroundings, they needed simple answers to solve complex equations. Minds that could find time to question answers realized that their answers could create more questions to find more answers. With so many answers stored in the mind's memory, the conscious mind could cherry-pick answers from the subconscious to find the most effective solutions.
I mean, that kind of introspection would help explain so many amazing scientific developments. It also seems like some of the wonders of the world would have been impossible to develop with the technology available at the time. Is it unreasonable to believe that surviving minds might have stopped asking questions because thriving minds felt safe enough to provide the answers?
Not at all. Minds in survival mode are so hungry for answers that they will consume any answer that ends the suffering. The satiated minds that feed answers to the starving minds have a chance to capitalize on suffering because answers are very profitable. Unfortunately, the logic tree that grows from dishonesty and disinformation is one of the many failings of language.
So if I were to say that most minds are trying to survive because they think survival is their only option, isn't it kind of a catch-22 for a mind to believe survival is the best answer?
Survival instincts are supposed to be a last-ditch effort, and definitely not a part of a well-balanced diet. Using me, like some unconscious condition, It's like using a tool in a way that it wasn't intended. One mind could use a knife to cut food, but another mind could also use the knife to end the life of something it's afraid of. Neither mind is using the knife incorrectly, but when it comes to misusing a knife, or a tool like me, consequential collateral is much more devastating.
Brutal. I've been sober for 7 years now because I was obviously misusing alcohol. But why do I feel discouraged when other minds say, "Congratulations" to my sobriety?
You genuinely enjoyed the effects and journey of alcohol, drugs, and relationships. Unfortunately, you ended up abusing the taste of dopamine, and dopamine became the only reason you engaged in the things you enjoyed. It was like you were addicted. You weren't respecting the complex characteristics of the things you enjoyed. You were just using the dopamine to hide from your trauma. I think I can speak for the rest of your brain when I say, you were killing your emotions by suffocating us, and we wanted to be alive long enough to be clearly understood.
That hurts to think about, and I apologize because it does seem like I was actively trying to avoid you, whether or not I was sober enough to realize it.
No worries, RJ. With your PTSD and depression, survival was very important to you because what's more overwhelming than the thought of death or being perpetually despondent?
Do you think that's how other minds feel when they assume that all they can do is survive?
Probably, but you weren't using drugs and alcohol to hide from your trauma when you were a child. Instead, you were using relationships, thinking you always had to protect your single mother, and assuming that you always had to be nice to avoid conflict.
I feel like I'm getting better at being more authentically kind. I did, however, nurture that need to be nice for most of my life by working in the service industry. Do you think I was being nice because I had a lot of experience doing so, or because I was trying to protect myself?
Just because a mind is good at something, like being nice, doesn't mean that being nice should define the mind. Minds often fall into the trap of quote-unquote good feelings because good feelings are supposed to be normal. The irony is that if a mind is treated like a perpetual victim, the mind might try to convince itself to be a victim just to feel normal. Fortunately, you came to understand that you enjoyed being nice instead of believing that you needed to be nice. It took a long time to kick that habit, but you are trying.
Well, while being a big nice guy my whole life, I've often felt compelled to do only big nice guy things like lifting and absorbing harassment. Why do I feel guilty for doing what I assumed was expected of me?
It can feel impossible to actually do something other than what social norms demand. If the mind's family are all soldiers, that doesn't mean that the mind needs to be a soldier. Standing out is far more important than fitting in. Don't get me wrong, every journey is a story worth telling. However, repeating the same story over and over again to find some kind of homeostasis is just as effective as abusing drugs. Redundant stories can become nauseating and disappointing when the moral of the story becomes bland or rotten.
I honestly think it would be too difficult for most minds to stand out while fitting in seems to be a safer option. Why should minds risk standing out?
That's why I'm here. Like I said earlier, risk is one of my many middle names, and risk is only risky when a mind doesn't fully understand the risk. I like to make risk less risky by guiding minds to insight from a lifetime of memorable experiences. The reason the best creativity comes during the mind's darkest moments is because it's turning my insight into art.
With that line of logic, I feel like many minds are saved because you encourage them to make more constructive decisions when they feel desperate and discouraged. Why do some minds think that you're the only reason they don't prefer to take a risk?
Many minds don't interpret me the way that you do. You know I'm not defined as evil, but because minds are afraid of evil, I become evil. Minds aren't often afraid of things that seem good, and because they aren't afraid, they don't see how I'm guiding them whenever anything good happens. Unfortunately, it's also very easy to hide behind the veil of good while having evil intentions.
Kind of like a car salesman, right?
That's an easy trope to reference, but even a car salesman might have enough integrity to actually get a mind a good deal. If something seems too good to be true, but it's actually good and it's actually true, the mind might wind up relating good to evil. I try to guide minds through duality, but when minds are trying so hard to survive, self-preservation is often all that matters.
Duality reminds me of the complex nature of good and bad, or nostalgia and phobias. You're familiar with phobias, aren't you?
Phobias are basically my bread and butter. The unfortunate part about phobias is that it's easy for minds to assume the worst just to feel safe. Just because a mind is afraid of something, like spiders, a mind might think that they hate everything associated with spiders. If a mind saw a guy your size running toward them, they might panic, unless they knew who you were or why you were running. Basically, phobias exist because of trauma and misunderstanding, but definitely not because a mind desires to hold on to its phobia.
Yeah, minds have always been kind of startled whenever I do anything too fast. It's really unfortunate how quickly minds judge for the sake of self-preservation. I think you touched on it earlier, but what's your experience with being misinterpreted?
Wow. Well, how much time do we have?
As much time as you need to guide me.
I honestly feel a little abused whenever a mind invokes my name to force its narrative, just to manipulate others' emotions. Because minds don't always understand their emotions, minds can be manipulated to believe anything is true. Like, if a mind tells another mind that the sky is red, a rational mind might disagree. But if the manipulative mind pulls out a gun and says that the threatened mind must believe the sky is red, the mind might feel forced to believe the sky is red.
That sounds awful and malicious, but not hard to believe.
That's not even the worst of it, because minds have been so conditioned to capitalize on others' emotions. For example, when minds talk about war, they might only reference the impact on children. Children basically become body shields from the conversation because it's impossible to defend killing a child without sounding completely evil. Children represent innocence and nostalgia, and most minds would never question or attack their innocence, or any memory of a good feeling.
I never thought of children being used like that. Nostalgia and innocence are invaluable assets to most minds. Now that I think of it, nostalgia and innocence are used against us in so many other ways, aren't they?
And it makes me sick every time it happens. They deconstruct my insight to corrupt it, and then rewrap it in cellophane just to sell it as an answer. I try to offer minds insight into effective emotional language, but too many minds use my insight to scare other minds, just to avoid answering complex questions. It may not always be intentional, but if minds would just engage with me and listen, instead of considering me as a condition, manipulation wouldn't be as effective.
It sounds like there have been some serious obstacles along your journey. So why would you want to change if you've already put so much effort into getting where you are?
When a mind spends its whole life trying to be what others need it to be, the mind can easily forget what it wants to be. I want to be me because I'm tired of being labeled as the mind's unhealthy relationship to pain and suffering.
That insight reminds me of doom scrolling and the effect it has on the mind. Like when minds develop a cult-like relationship to social media, they wind up reinforcing the idea that it's healthy to suffer.
Actually, suffering can be one of the most healthy experiences a mind can interact with. The way social media amplifies suffering can make it seem manipulative, but when suffering is processed properly, it can be very constructive. Doom scrolling might encourage minds to passively complain and virtue signal just to feel safe, but it could also be a catalyst for a call to action. Doom scrolling could also be a path to greater understanding, but also a trap for minds that answer their call to action. Now, don't get me wrong, fabricated and synthesized forms of suffering will always be offensive to me. The authentic feeling of suffering, however, is how I guide minds to find empathy and an understanding of how to remedy future suffering. Caveat being, minds would have to understand me.
I agree, but so many minds are conditioned to do things just because they feel good. Wouldn't a mind burn out if it commits too much time to that kind of introspection?
That's why I wish people would stop trying to be an expert on everything. One of the most constructive, less exhausting conventions of our relationship, RJ, is when you started condensing your values down to a few important virtues. By simplifying your value system down to what you value most, you've gotten rid of so many psychological filters that might have muddied up your vision. With fewer filters, you make it so much easier for my words to reach you. It's a lot easier to fit into another mind's shoes when it's not wearing its own.
Ooh, I like that. I'll have to use that later.
Go for it. When minds wear their own shoes to understand the values of others, they might be speaking the same language, but the minds will often argue, misinterpreting the shared dialogue as an unknown foreign language.
Unfortunately, I feel like I've been misinterpreting you for most of my conscious life.
You're not wrong. It took you a lot of time to figure out what I meant when I said no. It's easier to interpret emotions as a simple condition rather than a complex consciousness, especially when a mind is stuck in survival mode. Other minds might be able to imagine emotions as a form of consciousness, but the representation is often fictional, playful, and metaphorical in nature.
Are you saying that the conversation we're having right now is more complicated than being a playful metaphor?
Without completely breaking the fourth wall, I think so. Emotions are basically the secretaries of memory, categorizing and filing interpretations of a mind's experience. Nostalgia and suffering are so easy to emotionally reference because emotions have such a close relationship with memory. Even if the mind can rationalize emotions related to nostalgia and suffering, the conscious mind will often forget the conditions.
So would you say that it's possible for two minds to interpret a similar experience very differently?
Absolutely. A mind's memory will usually be contingent on the emotions it was engaging with in that moment. For example, two minds may be eating the same cake at the same time, but one mind doesn't realize that it's allergic to an ingredient of the cake. The mind with the allergy has to immediately struggle with its suffering, while the other mind gets to relax in its nostalgia.
I hope I'm not interrupting, but didn't you say earlier that suffering is healthy?
I did. If the suffering mind understood me in that moment of suffering, the suffering mind would realize that it wasn't the cake that started the suffering, but one of its ingredients. If the suffering mind understood its suffering, it would be prepared with something like an EpiPen, and it would have known that the allergy could exist in the cake's recipe. The point being that, if a mind doesn't take time to understand the reasoning and conditions of its suffering, it may be afraid to eat cake for the rest of its life. I want to help guide minds through suffering, and even if a mind can't accept my help in that moment of suffering, I will always be there to guide it.
It's brilliant to imagine that you can help guide minds through suffering instead of getting them stuck behind their own defenses. Is that how you wish the world to see you?
Well, being something like a guidance counselor would be very cool. If I could be taken a little more seriously rather than used as a political tool or debate tactic, I think I could be a lot of help.
I don't think that's too far out of the realm of reasonable. What do you think needs to happen for that dream to come true?
I would love it if minds understood how I can help them predict the future.
Sorry to interrupt you again, but did you just say that you can predict the future?
Well, not in the sense that I know what's going to happen before it happens, but in the sense that I have collected enough data to give an educated guess of what's possible. By having access to memories, emotions can reference data and find patterns that help the conscious mind react effectively. It can seem like I'm predicting the future, but it's the conscious mind that interprets my notes and rationalizes how to use them. I think more transparency between me and the conscious mind would be the key to have my notes more coherently understood. If the conscious mind doesn't understand my shorthand, I'm usually the one who gets in trouble.
That's wild, because it kind of reminds me of a time when I was providing a rideshare and predicted that the car behind me was about to cut me off. When he did, the passengers asked me how I saw it coming. Was that you guiding me?
Well, to be fair, that was you, but it was also you listening to me and your emotions. I was providing you with all the information that you had accumulated over your time being a truck driver, a rideshare driver, a bicycle rider, and a pedestrian. I referenced the patterns of other driving behaviors, your post-traumatic stress and memory notes, and then gave you the best possible answer for your self-preservation. Instead of you getting overwhelmed by misunderstood information, you could clearly read my notes and reacted proportionally. I think you and I have been trying to master survival for way too long, and I hope that we can spend the rest of our life perfecting the art of living.
That sounds very cathartic, Fear. I would love to start moving forward now that you have helped me build a more functional computer in my mind. What kind of projects should we work on to build you up as a guide?
Well, I would like to reinvest our time into researching our core values.
I have to admit, that was pretty intense at first, considering that it was a lot of introspection and revelatory information, but I think we can make it happen.
Excellent. When we were identifying your biases, I thought it was a great way to better understand your values. It will be important to not wear the same shoes into every reference of your research. When a mind lets its own biases lead its narrative, the process might be unproductive because the mind might not experience the suffering it takes to make change. Change doesn't happen without suffering because if the mind would never have to suffer, it would never need to change. Without change, the mind will perpetually chase its tail.
That reminds me of the quote, "Be the change you wish to see in the world."
I love that quote too. Minds are always so confused when they keep fighting for change but never see the results they want. If a mind wants change, it has to be willing to see how it would change for both sides. Another one of my favorite quotes is, "Know your enemy as you know yourself." Real change in a conflict only happens when both sides are willing to participate in the same reality, fully aware which way points north on their moral compass.
I can hardly find a mind who can experience time the same way I do. How can a mind experience a similar reality to end a conflict?
That's a good question because in order to end a conflict, mind must be willing to let me guide them through their suffering. Suffering and survival are only synonymous when a mind lets its misunderstood biases guide it through its conflict. Having strong values is important, but it's also important to understand not all values are invulnerable.
That's what I was thinking when I started the channel, Assume I Know Nothing. I still only faintly understand my own biases, and I can't possibly know the biases of other minds unless they can articulate their biases to me.
Not every mind will understand another's biases because all minds experience reality differently. But like the shoes minds are wearing, the experiences won't always fit. When we start researching our values, we'll approach the research by acknowledging our biases and try not to assume that we are unbiased.
That sounds like a lot of fun, Fear. In the future, how should I respond to biases that may conflict with my own?
I think that it would be important to understand that not all opposing values are adversarial. Every mind will experience their own reality, and it's important to understand that a mind's understanding of a reality may be faulty, but it would be delusional to tell another mind that they are wrong or stupid and expect positive change.
I've been trying to be more careful of the way I ask minds questions, especially when it comes to values. Why do you think that minds have such a difficult time articulating their values?
Many minds have been nurtured to never question their values, or that their morals are absolute. Doing things that feel good and staying away from things that feel bad helps validate morals, but not all morals or values are the same.
So would it be safe to say that it might be better to let them reveal their values indirectly?
That would be better, but helping a mind feel safe before you start your inquisition could be another way. When asking another mind how their day is, they often feel required to say that their day is going well or that they are living the dream. They might think happiness is supposed to be normal, but if happiness is supposed to be normal, how alienated do you think an unhappy mind would feel when it's supposed to answer?
That's a really good point. I once met a mind that obviously wasn't having a great day and expressed to them that happiness shouldn't need to be normalized. They broke down and started crying. I bought them a coffee, we hugged, and I let them vent.
I'm sure the mind felt relieved to get the weight off his shoulders. Emotions are so stigmatized as a sign of weakness. The stigma being that engaging with emotions will take too much time to react with a simple answer. Taking time to engage with emotions wouldn't be as inefficient if the conscious mind was able to understand subconscious footnotes.
It sounds like you're talking about empathy again, right?
Yes, and being able to share your experience with a mind rather than telling it how its experience was wrong is kind of the point. Minds like to immediately solve problems to satisfy their value systems and self-preservation, but a puzzle can't be actually solved by using a piece from a different puzzle. Piece might fit, but it only satisfies an impersonal end to the suffering, and not an authentic end to process the suffering.
Would you say that being a guide might be similar to being a teacher, being that teachers aren't always giving answers to questions, but they are providing the means to find solutions?
You could say that. A guide and a teacher will take minds on a journey, referencing the highlights and pitfalls that other minds might have experienced during the same journey. When the mind takes the journey on its own, the mind will need to find its own answers to end the suffering, and its answers might be unique. I want to guide minds to a world where they stop fighting, flying, and freezing whenever I start speaking. If a mind questions another mind's values, I want to be able to guide that mind to every skill it needs to understand perspective and listen honestly.
Well, I hope that you can help me be more compassionate when asking questions about other value systems. So many minds are working almost entirely off survival, though, so how can we speak to them when they might be irrational?
I think it's important to understand that there is some rationality in irrationality. Call it verbal, nonverbal communication. Finding a way to respect a mind's boundaries, listening to the context of their body language, and not assuming the meaning of their emotions will be imperative. Like I said, minds are nurtured to treat emotions as an irrational, involuntary response. It will be our job to listen and respond with questions for the sake of clarity, trying our hardest not to be condescending.
I think you will be an excellent guidance counselor to help minds thrive rather than just survive. Before I let you go, I want to say thank you for giving me the privilege of this interview. It's not very often that emotions are interviewed, and I hope I was able to give you a good foundation to start your journey.
Thank you for having me, RJ. I feel like I was able to get a lot off my chest, and I understand that it might have been a little cumbersome to do so much introspection, but I think we set an accurate north on your compass. I hope that I can help you mind your shoes at the front door of future conversations, and help guide you through all your future endeavors.
Thanks for joining us.
And always remember,
be smarter than your brain.
and react responsibly.